Let's get things started. Hey guys, Hattopy here. When you think about Resident Evil games, what kind of things come to mind? You could think about Resident Evil 7, one of the best games to come out of 2017. You could think about 2005 and Resident Evil 4, one of the best games ever made. And in between that and then, there were some other games that no one ever really liked. But anyways, when you ask some other people though, you're probably going to get some answers about the 90s games. Resident Evil, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Resident Evil Code Veronica. These games are all classics in most people's eyes. But some people tend to overlook one of Capcom's other survival horror games. Released just before Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Capcom graced us with Dino Crisis. So Dino Crisis begins with an email from a guy named Tom, who's a part of the Secret Operation Raid Team, or SORT, describing how one of their former scientists, Dr. Edward Kirk, who has been declared dead for the last 3 years, has actually been leading some sign of a scientific experiment. SORT then sends some agents to go and retrieve him at the research base. Enter operatives Rick, Gale, and Regina, and holy moly. Yeah, this is probably where my affinity for redheads began. Granted, I mean, it looks nice and all, but someone had to dump a tub of blood on there in order to get it that color. Anyways, you guys touch down at the facility to find it desolate, with most of the remaining bodies torn apart by something, and one of your teammates that was supposed to be with you missing, to which we found out as seen earlier that he was actually chased down and attacked by something. I don't know, Barney, maybe. During your preliminary searching, Gale actually goes missing, and Regina ends up being attacked by some dinosaurs. So, now your journey truly gets to begin. Rendezvous with Gale, search and apprehend Dr. Kirk, find out the secrets of the island and Kirk's experiments, and try to make it off the island with all of your limbs intact. It goes without saying, but really, if you played any of the old Resident Evil games, then you definitely played Dino Crisis, at least with how it controls. You move in a tank-like fashion with fixed camera angles, but unlike the rest of the Resident Evil counterparts, Regina can actually aim her weapon and move at the same time, something that does sound helpful on paper, but with the enemy types in this game, it does get a little pointless, but it's always a nice thing to have. Regina does get access to a few different weapons to use at her disposal, as well as a decent variety of ammunition. You use such items to deal with your incoming enemies, a large bunch of dinos. And yeah, there isn't too many enemies to fight, mostly suffering from palette swaps, but I mean, come on, they're dinosaurs. Have you seen Jurassic Park? There's some scary stuff. So yeah, whenever any sort of enlarged reptile appears on screen, you're in for a showdown. But thankfully, you have a few different means of dealing with the opposition. You could gun all the dinos down till they don't get up, but make sure that they're dead because they like to play dead and nibble at your ankles if you try to go past them. They also take a lot of bullets in general in order to take them down, so it's not ideal forever. You can also get a hold of tranquilizers, which can put dinos down for a nice little nap a little bit easier, but if you leave the room and come back, they'll be awake, eager to have a morning snack on your hip, so it's always best to use them if you're not going to be coming back to that room. Your last option is to just run past everything, which isn't a bad thing for later playthroughs of Dino Crisis, even for first-timers as well, since you may not have the items needed to deal with a room at the time. The problem with it though is that you need to be careful to which room you leave to. Unless it's a story important room or a safe room, dinos can barge into the room you entered into, pressing you for action since they like to trap you in tiny little locker rooms. Something that can help this is laser traps, or using air ducts, but not every room has these, so sometimes you just gotta make a decision of one of my previous mentioned choices. If you do end up getting attacked, you have to keep an eye on Regina herself in order to see how she is doing in order to determine her health, since there's no UI to tell you her health bar. There are certain states Regina can be in to determine how best to heal her. If she's standing upright with nothing wrong, then she's still healthy. If she's holding her sides, then she's decently injured and probably requires healing with medpacks soon. Or in any of those states, she could also be bleeding, which will continuously sap health from her, to which you'll have to heal her with a hemostat. You can also mix items to make everything you need, as well as find them scattered about in special boxes that do require plugs in order to get access to them, which is important because you can find some boxes to actually store some of your items in to free up some inventory space. Now, this wouldn't be a survival horror Capcom game without puzzles, and I'd say they're about 50-50 on how good they are. The large bulk of the ones you find scattered throughout the facility are fun enough, between moving large crates with selected movements to open a path, to using gases to level out the toxic nature of a room to make it safe to enter. The ones that irk me, though, are the DDK doors. You need to have 2 different discs for that specific door already, but the decoding puzzle that comes with the door themselves annoy me to the core. Ugh. Admittedly, I've not been one for wordy puzzles like these, but these feel like there's no rhyme or reason behind the clues for them, so I end up just relying on memory and, inevitably, game facts on these ones. The other puzzles I do enjoy, though. Now for some spoilers. Dino Crisis' story isn't anything too special, but it does like to touch upon time travel a little bit, and I find that if you're any sort of entertainment medium and using time travel as a plot, it doesn't usually work very well. But in Dino Crisis' case, I find that they at least explain it and handle it pretty well. And with how the story is told, it's actually quite reminiscent of how Nemesis handled its story. Unlike, say, Resident Evil 2 and how you pick your story from the start, Dino Crisis has the same starting point, but interwoven throughout the story is different decisions that'll change that specific point in the plot. For example, there's one point where you and Gale are trapped inside this computer room with a bunch of dinos about to storm the room. The doors are locked, but only for so long, and you need to get out somehow. Gale suggests taking the fight to them and storming out the room guns blazing, leading you down the path. Or Rick, over radio, suggests that you take the secret passage that's in the room that'll lead you to safety, but you only have so long to figure out the puzzle before the door's unlocked and you become the equivalent of a fish in the barrel. There's a few of these scattered throughout the game, but they mostly don't affect much of the story, much like how Telltale games say that every decision matters, but they largely don't in the long run. But at the end of the game, you do have to deal with a scenario that requires a few different options to pick from, and however you deal with any of those situations can lead you down to one of a few different endings, which I really like. Now, I haven't really mentioned bosses because really there isn't many, at least a variety of bosses. There's just one to worry about, and that's the big old T-Rex that you see at the start of the game. That one scene at the very beginning where Cooper gets eaten implements the looming sense of dread into your mind until Regina's actual first encounter with it. In the Chief's room, you find a near-dead scientist who spouts stuff about how Kirk is nuts and whatever. As you go to check the security box behind him, you find a key card and some other items, but as you go to leave... Anyways, you fight the T-Rex here, but all you really need to do is to keep it from eating you whole or bail out of the room. Next is after contacting a rescue helicopter, to which the T-Rex will chase you down a large walkway and you'll have to dodge his bites. You'll have to hold out against it as well when it inevitably takes down the helicopter shortly after, since if your occupation in Capcom games is helicopter pilot, it means death. You encounter it a few more times, eventually leading to one of the endings that you'll get. The T-Rex comes for one final showdown, and the conditions and weapons used on it vary on the ending, and they all fill you with this air of intense and vigorous need to best the big Mamma Jamma once and for all. Very similarly to how Nemesis handles itself. In fact, Dino Crisis is pretty much a copy-pasted adventure from Resident Evil 3, minus the enemies and the story, but I find that the change to the enemy structure helps it stand out on its own. Resident Evil houses a large number of slow-moving zombies in such tight spaces that moving around them gets pretty hard. Dino Crisis, on the other hand, has far less in what seems like more open spaces, but the dinos are so nimble and fast with their attacks that getting around them is equally as challenging. Same sort of setup, but different means to achieve the end goal. And in the end, it's not like Dino Crisis did that bad anyways. It spawned a sequel in Dino Crisis 2, which was actually a really neat mixture of run-and-gun action gameplay like Contra, mixed with the Resident Evil formula that we've all been accustomed to. I haven't played it all that much, it was more of a rental game from way back in the day, but I do remember it fondly. There was also Dino Crisis 3, which I haven't played, but it's dinosaurs in space, okay? What more do you need to ask? Jason went to space and nobody liked that. But Dino Crisis is a series that I'll always remember fondly as being that game. You know what I mean. Some people had like Final Fantasy or Mario or whatnot. But for me, I'll always remember going home to visit my dad on weekends. We would finish our supper and then we would sit down and he would play Dino Crisis while I watched. And my dad, he's never really been much of a gamer then or now, but he's always had a soft spot for Dino Crisis. And I just got so engrossed watching with him. It was just so much fun to see him do all these things. And he would even let me take turns sometimes. And I just always wanted to play like him. And so I would just go and start trying to play like him until eventually. I want to play anymore, Dad. Anywho, thanks everyone so much for watching. If you like what you saw, click right here to see some of my other videos that I made. Or maybe if you really feel like it, click up here to maybe subscribe. Like, man, why not? It's up to you. But until next time, guys, I will see you all later. Just gonna kill some time. It's gonna be like The Sopranos. Just gonna cut off